Welcome back, everyone, to OpenLine. Talking with political science professor Dr. John Vile, professor at MTSU. And we've been talking about the war in Ukraine. We've been talking about the Supreme Court nomination. And now I want to talk about a new book that you have written that details prayer in schools. Now, there we can almost see it there. Now I see it. So tell me, why did you decide to write a book about prayer in schools? Kind of give me an overview. What's the situation with this?
Life. And it stems from the fact, I primarily have taught in my career constitutional law. And so I'm very familiar with it. All of us, the first thing we think about with prayer is, well, you can't have public prayer in public schools. And that's only half the story, because we have a lot of prayer in public life. Presidents mention it in their inaugural addresses, sometimes call on people actually to pray with them. We have plenty of American documents. We have proclamations of prayer and thanksgiving that are issued every year. Ever since the 1950s, we've had a national prayer breakfast. There's a rare politician who doesn't in one way or another invoke God or invoke prayer. And it's sort of designed to show the complexity. Our laws say one thing, but they're embedded within a wider culture. One of the interesting things I found out when I was researching this is there's a good bit of there's an expression that there are no atheists in foxholes, but there's actually studies that show that even atheists tend to pray. There seems to be something inherent in, the human psyche. And of course, Christians would say, believers would say, God has created us to be in communication with him. It's part of the soul that we have. And one of the things that I find interesting is, one of the places that you can pray that the Supreme Court has said they have not outlawed prayers is in state legislatures and in Congress. Most of them have chaplains, and increasingly people are recognized in Congress a faith other than Christian faith. And it's a way of sort of saying, well, you may be a Hindu and you may not pray like Christians, but we recognize that you're spiritual beings too. And Muslims and Jains and all different kinds of groups, that have been given sort of unofficial inclusion in the polities simply by allowing them to pray in public places.
What can we learn about prayer in school by looking at our history? Our history, it's evolved, right? I mean, we had a lot more prayer than we do now, and you're right about there is prayer. It can be a moment of silence. But what did prayer used to be like in schools, and what do you think we can learn about where we may be heading in the future?
Well, part of what we can learn from it is that we've become a much more pluralistic nation than we were. But even in the 19th century, there was this general notion that all Christians read the same Bible, King James Version, and all basically prayed the same way. And it turns out that was true of the large majority of people. Most Americans identified as Protestant Christians. But Catholics and others were so offended by, reading a translation that they did not approve and without commentary by the priest that they thought was appropriate, that many of them did what evangelicals and fundamentalists have done in the 20th and 21st century, which is take their children out of school and form their own schools. And so, we had this notion that everybody must think and pray the same way as we do, and it simply wasn't true. But we didn't realize it wasn't, or a lot of people didn't. We're not partisan. We're reading the King James Version. Well, King James Version is not accepted by all denominations.
Where do you think this takes us in the future? Do you think, because there's some that want to bring prayer back into schools. Do you see that happening? Where do you see us in a generation?
Well, I don't think that we're going to have public prayer I don't think we're going to have prayer that is written by teachers and superintendents in public schools. And frankly, I wouldn't want my children repeating a prayer. I like our elected officials, but I don't know if I have enough faith in them. We have our own pastors and Sunday school teachers, and I don't particularly want somebody in a public school telling my children what they need to pray or what parts of the Bible they need to read. So, and I think there's probably a consensus on that. But that John F. Kennedy, when he, the Engel versus Vitale, the prayer decision was made when he was president, and they said, what do you think about it? And he says, well, this is just a reminder that we still have rights as parents. We still have homes. We still have churches, and nobody, because we have a First Amendment that guarantees our free exercise of religion, nobody can stop us from praying the way we want to.
So you're saying prayer came out of schools when John F. Kennedy was president. Is that right?
Well, it wasn't because of him. The Supreme Court decision, Engel versus Vitale, was a 1962 decision. And then the next year, there was a similar decision related to the repetition of the Lord's Prayer and Bible or devotional Bible reading in school. Now, you could study text within the Bible for their literary or historical context, but you can't teach them devotionally in a public school setting.
And how much did you study that time period in 1962? How controversial was that decision?
Well, it was very controversial. It was very controversial. There were many people, and there, Clarence Thomas, if I remember correctly, is on record as saying that we didn't have all these modern problems until we kicked God out of the public school. But what the fascinating time, the 50s and 60s are particularly fascinating in American history, because we were fighting godless communism, and communists were godless. I mean, that was part of their ideology. And so how do we distinguish ourselves from them? Well, we start the prayer breakfast. We adopting God we trust as a national motto. We add under God to the Pledge of Allegiance. And all of these were means of sort of contrasting America's religious freedom as opposed to an anti-religious, anti-Christian, anti-God ideology.
That is very interesting. And all right, so bottom line, what would people take away from this book?
Well, it depends on what they're looking for, I guess. There are about 200 entries, and it's arranged like an encyclopedia. So, I take the most famous speeches and most famous documents and whatever. I think what they would find is it's really simplistic just to say, we kick God out of schools, we don't have prayer anymore. Prayer is all around us. It may not be publicly prescribed prayer, but as I say, studies show even atheists pray. So it's going to happen no matter what the government says.
I think that's very interesting. All right, well, thank you. Thanks for talking about that. So
You're welcome.
We're covering all kinds of things. We got the new book.
We are.
What's the name of the book? What's it called?
It's called Prayer in American Public Life, an Encyclopedia, and it's actually published by the First Amendment Press here at MTSU.
That's great. All right. Well, very good. All right. We'll take a break. We'll come back, talk some more politics. We'll go back to that. Talk more politics right after this.